Welcome back to Yang Daily. I'll be your host, Alex Cheney, bringing you all the Yang news you need to live your life right. First off, thank you to those who have reached out to offer your support. It's those people who take the information from the podcast and turn it into activism that make this worth doing, and those who help support us financially, all the more so. Thank you to everybody out there putting in the work along with me. This community is wholesome and a force for good in the world. I'll do all that I can to keep it going. It's been a bit, but the news has been mercifully light in my absence, so we'll be caught up on most of the big items since Friday here, I think. Let's get to it. Quick shout out to our Tier 3 patrons Peter Park, Shay Meehan, and Nathan Stankowski, as well as all our other patrons. You keep us all informed and engaged. If any of you out there want to join these advocates of humanity first and independent journalism, head on over to patreon.com/YangDaily. It would only take a couple of bucks a month from each listener to keep this podcast and community going and growing into the future. Now on to the news. Starting off with some good news, the Johnson & Johnson vaccine has been approved by the FDA for emergency use. I believe that's the fourth vaccine in the fight, or maybe we're still waiting on the AstraZeneca one, I'm not entirely sure. The House has passed Biden's relief package, sending it to the Senate for an amendment process to begin. This is where Romney's child tax credit amendment will be considered and hopefully approved, though I haven't heard any support from it from Democratic leadership yet. It is also where the minimum wage will see a major roadblock. The parliamentarian who advises on what can and cannot fit into the rules of reconciliation has ruled that the wage hike does not qualify. That is unsurprising since it has nothing to do with federal taxing or spending. Democrats will now have to choose between three options. They can drop it from the bill entirely, they can try to push it through against the parliamentarian's objection, or they can modify it into a tax incentive scheme wherein corporations would face higher taxes if they pay less than $15 an hour. The latter seems the best approach. In fact, applying it to only large companies would remove the objection of harm to small businesses. Either way, the process will take some time, though Democrats have the option of voting to end the amendment process early. As expected, the relief checks will be $1,400 for everyone, making less than $75,000 a year, with the benefit declining to zero at $100,000 a year. Self-proclaimed conservatives held CPAC, in which the GOP made clear both in words and in polls that Trump remains the head of the cult. Trump himself spoke and intimated a 2024 run, though he would do that either way to keep the money flowing. I don't see why he wouldn't run again, as even a loss would bring in massive donations that he could use to cover his legal expenses for white-collar crimes that are coming up in court. It really reminds me just how nice it's been that this is the first I've heard from him since inauguration. Nothing lasts forever, though. Trump spent time detailing a hit list for his next cult loyalty purge, consisting of every Republican who voted to impeach him. Loyalty to the leader above loyalty to country. Both Trump and others at the conference expressed approval of the voter suppression efforts going on around the country and reaffirmed their commitment to the voter fraud lies that have dealt untold damage to support for democracy in America. The CEO of Goya Foods even said that, in his opinion, Trump is the, quote, real, legitimate, and still actual president, end quote. People focus on the Capitol attack, but it's only the physical manifestation. Refusing to accept election defeat is always the core of an authoritarian coup. The number of voter suppression bills in consideration has grown to 253, and many Republican legislators are using newfound distrust in elections, which they themselves caused with voter fraud lies, as the justification for restricting voter access. Some are not even pretending. Lindsey Graham said that Senate Republicans would conduct oversight of mail-in balloting because, quote, if we don't do something about voting by mail, we are going to lose the ability to elect a Republican in this country, end quote. Not only is that blatantly hostile to democracy, not only does it ignore that parties are supposed to fit their policy to the voters, not the other way around, but if it's true at all, it is only due to the lies spread by the GOP to convince their own voters not to vote by mail. Prior to Trump's authoritarian campaign, voting by mail had never been found to favor either party disproportionately. That is a myth that is spread by both sides. It's worth noting that as patriotic conservatives leave the GOP, the party will become even more loyal to the increasingly radical base that remains. In better news, following the model created by Giselle Huff and others with Santa Clara County's program for unconditional cash to foster youths leaving the system, California's state senator Dave Cortez has introduced legislation to expand the program to all of California's foster kids with $1,000 a month. This would be a big step for unconditional cash. First, it's foster youth, then it's all kids with a child tax credit. Seniors already have something close, and eventually it's a small step to expand it to everyone else. Make sure your reps know where you stand on SB 739 and show some love to Cortez for stepping up. On the Yang side, Andrew announced that he would formalize an Asian hate crime task force to address the rising violence in New York City against Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. Finally, as a fantastic addendum to that, we have an incredible story on Yang himself. Mayoral candidate by day, crime fighter by night, Andrew stopped talking about crime interrupters and became one during a ferry ride. A photojournalist who was photographing Yang on the ferry was assaulted by a man who is reportedly mentally ill. The man shoved the reporter to the floor and brandished a metal broomstick handle over him. Seeing this, Yang immediately ran and interposed himself between the two, preventing any further attack. Better yet, he did not use force to end the attack. He was able to talk the man down. In fact, the attacker reportedly said he would vote for Andrew by the end of it. Talk about unconventional campaigning. Yang also stuck to his guns on reform, saying that we need more mental health services, including in emergency response. That is what it looks like to live your values. The journalist says that he is very grateful for Yang's intervention. Unfortunately, there are no details on what triggered the attack or what the assailant's condition is. What would make this story perfect for me is for Yang to follow up with the man and see if he can aid in his recovery. We could use less retribution and more rehabilitation in this country. The empirical evidence is clear which serves better at reducing crime. The reporter was uninjured, as was Yang. It's going to be very hard indeed for anyone to label Yang as disingenuous after this. I am prouder than ever to call myself Yang Gang. And that'll do it for today's Yang Daily. Advocate for a budget-neutral and non-means-tested child credit. Keep pushing Sinema and Manchin on the filibuster so we can get Democratic reforms through. Thank Senator Cortez and push for SB 739 in California. Flood Congress with calls, tweets, faxes, and letters using the Resist bot or Income Movement easy contacts below. If you need help, consult Humanity Forward, the Income Movement Aid Database, the Mission Asset Fund, or United Way, and don't forget to Yang Daily.